Okay, this week we'll talk about indicators. Indicators. If you're going to make a model, you have to measure something. You have to measure something. You need data. So we're going to look at the two main data categories, or the two main data sets that we measure, observe, so that we can determine the size of an economy. First, we'll talk about GDP. That's chapter 4. And then we'll talk about employment and inflation. That's chapter 5. I have some data that's not in the textbook, and it's not tested. I'm not going to test you on the latest data. But if you're ever interested in finding out where economists get their numbers, or if you need some economic data, the place you go is Stats Canada, StatsCan for short. And I'll show you, and there's an application that you can use. I'll be using the application if you want to go to StatsCan. I will always have the reference number of the table so that you'll be able to look at it in your own time. If you find it difficult to sleep at night and you need some help sleeping, StatsCan data tables are very good for helping you to sleep. Okay. So, look what we have here. What's the story from last week? First sentence, you get up in the morning and go to work so that you can get paid, so you can buy the stuff that you made. Good. Good. That was chapter 2. Chapter 3 was Chapter 3 is about determining prices. That's microeconomics. So if the forecasts are accurate and markets begins with E, F, if markets are efficient and there's no corruption, then markets clear. You make a price. Okay, so you get up in the morning, go to work, so you can get paid, so you can buy the stuff that you made. If markets are efficient, there's no corruption, and forecasts are accurate, markets clear. This week, and when the quantity of all production increases, on average, every actor has a higher standard of living. So what we do is, instead of you get up, go to work, everyone gets up and goes to work. Why? So they can get paid. So they can buy some of the stuff that other people made. That's for the whole economy. And instead of having just a coconut market or a banana market, we look at all of the markets in the country and we take all of the value of those markets together the value of all the goods and services, if that goes up, in general, the theory is everyone has a higher standard of living. So if the value of everything produced goes up in a year, in general, everyone has a higher standard of living. Really? No questions about that? Really? If the value of all goods and services in an economy increase during a year, you're better off? Guaranteed? Is it a guarantee that you are better off? If you're questioning what I said, good for you. Good for you. Because it's not necessarily a fact that everyone is better off if the value of all the goods and services produced in an economy goes up. It's not always the case. But we're going to make believe for the test. And to gain an understanding of the basics of how it works. So, we have our circular flow diagram. There are two ways to calculate GDP, or gross domestic product, or the value of all goods and services in an economy. You can do it by the amount that people spend in a year, or a month or a day, or you can do it by the amount that people earn. So it's income or it's production. You spend on production. How can you spend? You have to earn. Get up in the morning, go to work so you can get paid. Earnings, income. Why? So you can go and buy the stuff that someone else made. That's on the production side. To earn, you must produce. To be a producer, you must have people earning or they would not buy your product. So there are two calculations, two different calculations, but it's the same answer. GDP, value of all goods and services in an economy. So, in the picture, which icon is the earnings icon? It's the shovel. This is the factor market. The factor market. What is determined there? Wage. I use a small L for rent. So on land, you have land rent or you have other names like a lease, but generally that's the price of renting land. Wage, price of renting labor. Interest rates, the price of renting capital with a K. And profit, that's the price of renting a creative genius. In the factor market, this is where all the earnings take place, where the price of rents are determined, like wage rates, rental rates, profit rates, interest rates. This is where all of the earnings take place. Now you have earnings for individuals, which I use as a Y, but you also have the earnings for businesses. We need to add these two together. Because in an economy, we have individual actors, the people, but then you have business actors. They earn as well. So we put all of these together, and then we have to add, and I won't go into the individual names on all of these. The idea is you take what people earn, add in what corporations earn, then subtract taxes, not just any tax. These are indirect taxes. They're called indirect. Indirect taxes are taxes on the stuff that you buy. Those are the taxes on the stuff that you buy. Indirect. Why do they call it indirect? Because you do not pay it directly to the government. It goes to the business collects it for the government, then they give it to the government. That's the best way to look at it. So you add the indirect taxes. I'll put the little double star on that for over here. And then you subtract subsidies. And that's the TR I put here for net transfers. Net transfers. TR is net transfers. So how do you think of this? You go to the store, you buy something, and the price goes up 13% in Ontario because of HST, Harmonized Sales Tax. That sales tax goes to the government, and then when you do your income taxes, if you do not make too much money, some of the money comes back in a rebate. So the government takes from you when you buy, and if you didn't buy so much during the year, or if you don't have a lot of money in your pocket, etc., some of the money comes back to you. That's why subsidies are subtracted. It's coming back from you, but you already gave it to the government. That's why it's subtracted. So, individual earning, corporate earning, add them. Then add taxes, subtract subsidies, and the last thing, the D right there for depreciation. As we were speaking earlier, a student and I, depreciation is essentially what it costs business to produce in a year. What it costs business to produce, or another way to understand it is, the word is capital consumption. Capital consumption. To produce in a year, if you're using machinery, what happens to the machinery during the course of a year? Does it stay the same? Does it always produce the same amount? Mm-mm. What happens to it? Okay. That's called capital consumption. In English, we say that the equipment wears out. It wears out, W-E-A-R-S, out. But that can be confusing for some people. Capital consumption. Your productive capacity is being consumed. You start at the beginning of the year at 100% capacity, but during the year, your ability to produce decreases because the equipment gets older. It's not as efficient. It's not as effective. That's an expense to businesses. It's the cost of doing business. You have to replace that machinery if you want to maintain your productive capacity. As a student, what do you do to maintain your productive capacity in a day? To maintain your productive, you can say study. I can work with that. That's a higher level one. What's a lower level activity that you must perform to maintain your productive capacity? Sleep and eat and some leisure. So I see the smiles like, yeah, leisure is important. What's it called when you do not have enough leisure and you're study? What's the word called at the end of the day? We used to say you burn out. Burn out. Okay, you've got it. Student, a producer, essentially the same thing. You want to maintain your productive capacity. You do not want to overproduce. You may but we'll get into that. So, if you add in depreciation, you get GDP income calculation. So, one more time. First, add in individual earnings. Then, corporate earnings. Then, taxes, subtract subsidies, add depreciation, GDP income. That's one way to do it. The other side, the expense, the stuff that you buy, the stuff that we buy, all of the stuff that we buy. So, I'll keep that in there. This is a little bit easier. CIGNX, 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 CIGNX. Expenditures. What's it called when us people buy something? Begins with a C. Thank you. Consumption. What's it called? Consumption expenditure. What's it called when the government buys stuff? Government expenditure. What's it called when foreigners buy our stuff? Exports. What's it called when domestic companies buy equipment? Buy equipment and or the goods that they will put together to make another product. Those are intermediate goods. You buy tires if you're a car manufacturer, so that you can make a car. Almost gave it to you. What is it called when you're buying inventories? Inventories or equipment, replenishing your capital. What's it called when you're a business? There's consumption expenditure, government expenditure, CIGNX. CIGNX. Which one of those is for companies? Investment. That's the I up here, but that's the businesses, corporations are buying goods and services for their own use, investing in their future production, but generally they have to go through the financial markets, and they have to sell their future earnings. That's why it's in red. Remember, red is sell, blue is buy. Companies need to sell their future earnings so that they can get cash now to invest in their current productive capacity and hopefully make profit in the future. That's what you're doing here. You are, instead of being at a job, you are selling your current earnings to invest in your future earnings. This is what you're doing here. You're investing. Instead of having a job now, you're foregoing income so that you can have better income in the future. Same idea. Same idea. Okay. And if you're for households, if you're not consuming, all your income, what are you doing with the remainder? Begins with an S. Saving. So I said that expense. Oh, and what's it called when you go to Amazon.UK and buy goods and services from another country? Imports. Thank you. So, C, consumption expenditure, investment expenditure. Thank you. Government expenditure, and NX, where NX, net exports, is equal to exports minus imports. Why do we subtract imports? Where's the money going? Out. So do we count money that's going out of the country in the value of what our country has produced? You get some study notes from another student. Do you count that as your own production? You may benefit from it though. Smart. So C plus I plus G plus NX, where NX is X minus M. That gives us the value of all goods and services produced in the economy that have been bought in a year. And what should happen is that the size of the gift should equal the size of the shovel. It should. Does it ever? Exactly? No. And that's why you'll see a term called statistical discrepancy. Statistical discrepancy, where they make expense equal income. Okie dokie. Now, GDP as an indicator. If you printed the notes yesterday, you have to cross out this word should be the word. GDP as an indicator overestimates the value of all goods and services in an economy. Overestimates. Overestimates. Why? Think of an example. Think of an example. What do you notice? Have you ever noticed an indication that someone is getting paid, but the government does not know about it? Illegal trade. Underground. The underground economy. October 17th, 2017, what happened in Canada? October 17, 2017, they legalized cannabis. We'll see how much that was worth. Why do you think the government did that? To help reduce the underground economy. Gangsters, corruption. Reduce corruption. If you can reduce corruption, what happens to efficiency in the market? If efficiency goes up, what do you get? What kind of a price do you get? Higher, lower? In theory, it should go lower. What should happen to the well-being of everyone in the economy if you're able to reduce corruption? And for the ladies or the shutter husbands, it's called shutter husband in Korea. If your wife has a job and you stay at home, in the morning you go and open the shutters. That's your job. Household production is the major reason, is one of the major reasons that GDP is an underestimate. In other words, it should be higher. Fellas, what's the value of your mom? You don't know until she dies, but does your mom ever get paid for taking care of you? Ladies, it's not the job I would want to have. No pay. So GDP is an overestimator. There are some other things that are in the textbook. You can look it up. But it's the best we have. We need to start somewhere. We need data to follow. So if GDP goes up, we're better off. Now there are some alternative models. HDI, the health Health Development Index. It's based on leisure, education, and lifespan. Leisure goes without saying. If you have more leisure, you are better off, in theory, because you're able to afford the leisure. You're able to afford it. If you have no leisure and you're working all the time, how high is your well-being? How do you feel? That's one measure. Then there's simply the leisure, a model based on leisure, as opposed to how much money you make. Perhaps it's how much leisure can you afford and still have the standard of living a standard of living which is comfortable. Comfort versus more money. Comfort, more money. Which do you want? How do you measure it? This is why they use GDP, because these things are difficult to measure. And one that I've come across, the cost of energy per person in your country. The cost of energy. What does that tell you about your standard of living? The cost of energy per person. Right now, what's the price for a liter of gasoline over there? Probably $2.03. On the weekend, it was $1.96. What's the price of gasoline in your home country? Is it more or less? Right now, your home country, or where your ancestors come from, do you know? Who's got a higher price per liter? Lower price? 2 people. And the rest of you? You don't know. Interesting. Okay. Think of it like this. The affluent, AFF, the people with status, the people with money, wealth. Does the price of gasoline affect them? Does the price of a kilowatt of electricity affect them? It depends. Now, let's make that question a bit longer. Does the price of electricity affect them more or less than it affects you? And let's pretend that you're a student without a lot of money. The price of electricity, the price of energy, who does it affect more? So when the price of energy increases, what happens to your standard of living versus the other people? What's been happening in Canada for the past 3 months to the standard of living of people that on average make $15 an hour? What's been happening to their standard of living? Going down, primarily because inflation. And what's been inflating? Which prices have gone up? Petroleum? Which food? Basic necessities? Well, milk. Milk is $5.39 at Rexall, but I swear milk was $4.59 last year. Milk was $4.59 last year for 4 liters. What's the price? Like vegetables. What's the average increase in fresh, even frozen? What's the average increase in frozen vegetables over the past 6 months? Anyone? What I've seen, 25%, somewhere between 10 and 25% for frozen. Fresh, 50%. I was living in Kitchener. I saw a sign, a pizza sign, and right on it they crossed out the 5 and they stuck on a 6 for a medium. Inflation. So why would you have different indicators? You've got a new model. You will have some new indicators. Why would you have them? More accurate. More accurate to describe the well-being of the people. So the argument is you choose different indicators so that your data, that your model can be more relevant to the actual people that are being affected. And you see this now. A lot of people are upset because of the prices. Prices are going up. Okay. So there's the overall picture for GDP. Now we're on time. Let's do some math. So I mentioned it's called investment for a corporation or for a student. You borrow money, you sell your future opportunity, you sell your current opportunity to borrow so that you can increase your long-run productive capacity. Investment is to increase or maintain your productive capacity, how much you can produce. You need to invest in yourself if you want to have a future wage go up. Or you invest in your company, same idea, to maintain the level of productive capacity, your ability to produce. Perhaps there are 3 different categories of items you will buy. One is machinery for long term. Another is raw materials. For example, raw materials, steel. If you're a steel company. No, you're not buying steel if you're a steel company. You're buying iron ore. Iron ore. If you're a student, you're buying raw materials. What's your number 1 raw material? Food. Okay. So that's a basic input. But then there's another input that's called an intermediate good, where you buy something that someone else has made to help with your productive output. What's something that a student buys that someone else has made that facilitates their productive output? Textbook, computer, etc. When you buy something that someone else has made, that's not counted as GDP in your company. Someone else made it, that's someone else's GDP, someone else's income. The idea behind that the differentiation is called value added. When you calculate GDP, or the value of all goods and services in the economy, you only count the value that each individual or individual company has added to the value of that good or service. Value added. We have a value added tax. Value added is generally, this is done so as to get a better idea of how much the value of an economy is. So the following shows dollars per loaf of bread that is spent on factors of production in Chuckistan by each level in its supply chain. Calculate GDP using the expenditure model if output is 1,250 loaves per year to 2 decimals. So we have our supply chain here. We have the farmer, we have the miller, we have the baker. Farmer grows the grain, the miller grinds the grain, and the baker bakes the bread. So we have 5 cents a loaf, 20 cents a loaf, 50 cents a loaf in expenditure. So this is an expenditure model. So let the GDP for expense equal total expenditure-based GDP, and that's going to equal to total expenditure per unit times number of units. I'm giving you the long explanation of this with all of the units because someone's going to get it wrong because they didn't read the notes or write down the units. Trust me when I say, know your units, always write down the units, my friends. Then you'll know if you got the right answer. Okay. You can do this math 2 ways. You can do it the long way, or you can do it this way where I've put it all together. So what I would suggest when you do these questions, always write down which variable. So here, 1250, number of units. Farmer's cost, cost for farmer, cost per miller, cost for baker, just to keep it in front of you. Because during a test or a quiz, you get confused. If you write down which each variable is, then you just put them into the equation, boom, you're done. Okay, farmer's cost times, number of loaves, 1250. Miller's cost times 1250. Baker's cost times 1250. So this gives us the expenditure per each actor. Then we add them all up. So let's make this a little bit bigger. Farmer's cost, that was 5 cents. Thank you, 0.05. Miller, 0.2. Baker, 0.5, thank you. All times 1250. Add them up is 0.75 or 75 cents or $0.75. And the answer is $937.50. Therefore, the bread industry added $937 and, what's our decimal? 2. Okay. $937.50 of GDP expenditure to the Chuckistani economy. There may be a question that asks you for income. be prepared. But the calculation does not change. All you're doing is summation. Next, depreciation. The table shows data for the economy of Czechostan in millions of dollars for 20XX. What was the amount of depreciation in the year in millions of dollars? So in millions of dollars, how many decimals? Look at the data. How many decimals are in the answer? I hear rumbling, but You can do hand signs. How many decimals in the answer? I see a 0. I see the international currency. I've got money symbol. I see a peace sign. This is why you try to understand units. Always put down your units. You know what the answer is going to be when you look at the units. Here, it's in millions of dollars. 14 million, 2 million, 14 million. Then it says, what's the amount in millions? How many decimals? None. Okay. We're given beginning capital stock, gross investment, ending capital stock. Here's the picture from the video. I've changed it a little bit. Whatever your ending capital stock is inventory and machinery and equipment. Capital stock is machinery, computers, and inventories. Inventories is also capital. It can be converted to profits with a sale. Inventory plus capital equipment, that's your investment. So whatever you have at the end depends on whatever amount you had at the beginning, how much it depreciated, and then how much you invested. So the ending stock is equal to the beginning, whatever you had at the beginning of the year. Remember, your capital stock is reduced, it is consumed, your machinery wears out. You consume capital, that's depreciation, but then your gross investment is how much more did you invest in your company during the year. So gross investment, the amount that you invested to increase your capacity, minus the amount that was consumed, gives you net investment. Gross minus expense gives net. Gross minus expense gives net. You can also see this in Accounting 101. So here, let D equal depreciation, B beginning capital, G gross investment, E ending capital stock. So depreciation, what's the algebra? What minus what plus what? Well, let's see if we put the D over here and the E comes over here, change the sign. That must mean that we have an E here. We can put a B here, and then that means the G can go here. Would someone confirm that for me? Thank you. Once again, for the question, when you see these questions, make sure that B equals 14, beginning capital stock equals. If you write this on a piece of paper, it's very difficult to get the answer wrong. So, what's B? 14. What's ending capital stock? 14. Gross is 2. How much is depreciation? 2. Depreciation was $2 million in Chuckistan in 20XX, or $2 million of productive capacity was used to produce all of Chuckistan's GDP in 20XX. An interesting analysis of this question. If this is the complete Chuckistani economy, if it's the complete Chuckistani economy, has it grown, shrunk, or maintained the same size? I know one student here should know the answer, because we were talking about this before class. Look at the numbers. If this is the complete Chuckistani economy, has its capacity, ability to produce increased, decreased, or stayed the same, given the investment for the year? Stayed the same. How do you know? B equals E. Excellent. Another way to look at it is if you have gross minus depreciation gives you net. If net is greater than 0, what happens to capacity? If net is less than 0? If net equals 0? Exactly. For a student, the amount of calories that you take in a day versus the amount of energy you're using to study. You burn out if you don't eat enough and study too much. What happens the next day? Your productive capacity. So far, so good? This is one version of the question. What would different questions be? Instead of depreciation, how many other questions can I make from this one? Three more. There are 4 different questions from this data. I can ask for B, G, E, or D. Okay? So, right. Real GDP. In the video, I did some math for you. The math's not on the test. It's just to help you be able to talk about this. Think of it like this. What did we say? Prices are going up. Has anyone ever lived through prices going down? Anyone? Has anyone here lived through prices going down? You actually went to the store, and not just on sale this week. I mean, for a month, you've seen prices go down and they stay down. Has anyone ever seen that? Me neither. Me neither. In general, there are two things that are guaranteed in the world: your mother's love and prices go up. Oh, by the way, I think there's a question on the test about prices. Prices only go up. So that's why we use a term called real GDP. Real GDP is calculated not on price, not on price. Essentially, the indicator is quantity. How do you get, what is the calculation for value? You go to the supermarket. You buy 4 grapefruit at 50 cents each. What's the total cost? 4 grapefruit at 50 cents each. What's the total cost? $2. There's your expenditure GDP. Expenditure. Next week you go. You get 4 grapefruit. Oh, they're $1 each. What's total GDP or your total bill? $4. Does that mean that does that mean that productive capacity or the value of all goods and services has doubled just because prices doubled? What's the capacity still for grapefruit? Or whatever the grapefruit are, it hasn't changed. That's the idea behind real and nominal. Nominal, prices go up. What's GDP? Price times quantity, whatever this year's prices are. Well, guaranteed, almost certainly, what is always going to happen if you look at nominal GDP? What's going to happen to the value of an economy? It goes up. Why? Price goes up. So what do? We use prices from 2012. Before that, it was 2003. Before that, it was 1990 something. You set a base year. You look at the price of textbooks, pizza, and a coffee for students. You look at those prices, and then you set that as your base year price. And then for 10 years after that, give or take, you always use those values for your prices. Then you multiply by the amount of quantity that was produced or spent, number of coffees, number of textbooks, number of pizzas. And since you're using the same base year prices don't change, then you're able to determine if the economy is getting bigger or smaller. And it's based on quantity. So, real GDP. Year one nominal is 120 Pakistani dollars. While the price level is 80, calculate real GDP to the nearest whole number. How many decimals in a whole number? Show me a sign. We've got money. 0. No decimals. Okay. Price level. The general level of prices in the economy. General level of prices. General level of prices. Here, it's all the prices. When we start to talk about CPI, there is a specific set of prices. The deflator, I could have put in the deflator here. General level of prices. I don't want to confuse you with lots and lots of different words that all mean the same thing. I'll just use price level for the general level of prices. So, Real GDP, NGDP, PL. Okay, what do we want? We want real GDP. But first, what is the basic equation that we start, from where we start? Start at price level. What does price level equal? NGDP over real GDP, correct. How do you know this? You're in the middle of a test, you're going crazy, there's five minutes left and you've got half the questions. You come up with this. How do you know that price level is equal to nominal over real GDP? Usually. What happens to prices almost always? Goes up. So, what's going to be bigger, nominal or real? Nominal. Why? Which price is being used for nominal? Current. So if prices are almost always going up, what's going to be greater, current or the base year? Current. So which one has to be on top if price level is above 100? Nominal. I'm explaining this because I know someone very closely that probably got this wrong 40 years ago. Or was confused by it. So, real GDP is equal to, well, multiply, divide. Now, does that make sense? Real GDP is going to equal the nominal divided by some number and multiplied by 100. Does it make sense? So real GDP should be less than nominal GDP. Price level is usually greater than 100. So if you look at the math here, is it going to give you the right result? Where our GDP is less than NGDP? Yeah. It should be. It should be. It should be. What do we have here? Nominal is 120, price level is 80. Oops. Looks like we've got a tricky professor here. That's 12 over 8. 3 over 2. 166. 167. Nope. 150. That was close. Ah, right. 4 goes into that. So that's $1.5 times 100. That's $150. Real GDP was 150 in year 1. Sometimes price levels go down. I would advise that you be careful on the test because my numbers, sometimes price levels go up, sometimes price levels go down. Sometimes nominal is more than real and vice versa. Would you speak up? What was the question? Uh, uh, uh. Generally speaking, real GDP is going to be greater than nominal. Oh, 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 oh. Less than nominal. Therefore, price level, and price level is usually going to be 100, 105, 110. So when you're looking at the numbers, usually real is going to be less than nominal, therefore price level is higher than 100. That answer your question? Okay. What are the units on price level? There are none. It's an it's just a level. 100, 100%, 10 fingers, 10 toes, decimal. So we choose 100 for a level. Above 100, what's happening to prices in general? Below 100, what's happening to prices in general? No units. No units. And so, real GDP is one measure of standard of living. SOL, standard of living. Income equals expenditure, usually. Real GDP measures the change in quantity given the base year. Base year is 2012 in Canada at the moment. An increase in real GDP given that population is constant. So if population doesn't change and real GDP goes up, on average, everyone's standard of living goes up. And real GDP grows over time, but not at the same rate. Real GDP is going to increase and decrease. It's going to grow faster and slower over time. Any questions? None. How about this then? If real GDP grows at 5%, real GDP grows at real GDP grows at 5%. Okay? Population grows at 6%. What's happened to standard of living? Take a second. Look at this. And then look at that. So if the economy has grown at 6%, real growth of 5%, but the population grows at 6%, what's happened to the standard of living for the average person? It's decreased. By how much? 1%. That's not this test. This is coming. But for those, this is one of those math tricks. When everything is in percent, you can add and subtract. So the economy can grow, but if you've got immigration, then you're actually worse off, in theory. Take 15, be back at 2:30. If you have questions, come and see here.